Welcome everyone to the first OASIS talk of this fall. My name is Veli-Matti Karvahti. I'm from University of Jyväskylä. I have a pleasure to welcome Professor Tae-Jin Yoon from Yonsei University. I've known Tae for some years. We call him Tae now and then. And 10 years ago, when I was looking for an opportunity to visit Korea at the last year of my PhD, I sent email to 3 persons who I didn't know in Korea asking for a chance to do some games visit. And one of them was Tae, and the 2 other people said just call Tae. Tae was definitely the person in Korea to do games research. Yeah, I guess you keep it very closely. Tae has published a lot about games and culture in general. There are several books which we may hear in a bit. At least we should know digital game culture research. Also Korean Wave, webtoons, a lot of different things. And he's the president of Korean government-driven Game Science Institute. So I will stop here and give Tae the talk. We will have 20 minutes for questions.
20 minutes? Hello, do I have 20 minutes?
You have 40 minutes.
40 minutes,
40
right?
minutes and
okay.
then
20 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, hello. I'm Tae-Jin Yoon from Korea. And as Matti introduced, I'm a professor at Yonsei University in Korea and also the president of Game and Science Institute. Well, actually, I have to take a glance at my script, but at this moment I have to move around, so it will be very hard for me to make the good presentation. But well, I hope you understand the situation. I'd like to thank Matti for inviting me and Tampere University to give me the opportunity to have a speech today. Yeah, my presentation today is an introduction to Korean gaming studies, when and how it began and how it was developed and what prospects and challenges we have in the future. This talk is based on my different presentation at Sevilla, Spain in the DIGRA conference 2 months ago. But at the end of the talk, I will add some information about my own research net project I and some of my colleagues have operated in the last 3 or 4 years. Okay, the title of the presentation today is Game Studies Without Culture. In fact, it is almost like I'm giving away some conclusion on my presentation. My general idea about this is there has been too little attention to cultural factors in Korean academy about game. And without some serious attention to gaming culture or game player, human beings and things like that, instead of gaming industry or some psychological effect, then the future of the Korean game studies is not very bright. That's the point of my presentation. Well, before talking about Korean game studies, I guess you people are not very familiar with Korean game, current Korean game situation in terms of the industry. So let me give you some general information about the Korean gaming industry. Well, the data presented here is taken from the game white paper, which is published by Korean government annually. So it's very credible data, I can say. In 2021, the domestic game market is valued as 14.4 billion euros. It is 11.2% increase from the last year. Actually, it was 20% increase from the other year, and you can probably understand why it happens because of the COVID-19. The market share of the game kind of increased very rapidly. And currently the Korean gaming industry has a global market share of 7.6%, which is the first biggest behind the US, and China, and Japan, and then Korea. And game export are valued at nearly 8 billion euros. And import are valued at around 287 millions, but imports are growing a faster rate than export. Well, if I had a chance, if I had a long time, I like to talk about the industrial future of Korean game, which is very negative from my point of view, but that's not the point of today's presentation, so I will skip to the next slide. Let's talk about the game players in Korea. As of 2022, 74.4% of South Korean adult play games. This is a significant increase from, let's say, 65% in just 2 or 3 years ago. And more than 85% of those under the age of 50 were classified as game users in Korea. By device, mobile gaming dominate like 84%. PC gaming account for 54%, and mobile the only less than 18% of respondents said they play console games. So it's not a big market in Korea. On average, Korean gamers spend about 1.5 hours for playing PC games during the weekday, and maybe 2.5 hours during the weekend. And for mobile games, they play 1 1/3 hours during the weekday, and about almost 2 hours during the weekend. Okay, I'd like to move on to the next topic, the history of game research. To get to the point, I'd like to take a look at when game studies began in Europe. The oldest academic journal, you might know that, dedicated to game studies in English-speaking world is Game Studies, right? It was 2001, right? It published the first issue in July 2001. And by 2022, a total of 46 issues have been published. Another major academic journal named Game and Culture published its first issue in October 2006. In the first issue of Game Studies, the editor Espan Olset declared that 2001 can be seen as year 1 of computer game studies. Right? Let's go to the Korean situation. Well, interestingly, it was 2001, in the same year, that there is an academic society named the Korean Game Society was founded. And the first issue of Journal of Korean Game Society was published in 2001. It was the same year that the Game Studies was published for the first time. And well, the journal was initially published twice a year when they began the journal publication, then gradually increased the frequency until it is now they published 6 times a year. As of May this year, it has published a total of 111 issues. Another journal specializing in game studies, the Journal of Korean Society for Computer Game, was founded in 2006. But for this journal, over 90% of the research articles were dealing with kind of engineering part or design part, not the social science perspective of game. But well, anyway, but that is the second major journal specializing game studies, and it is kind of coincidence that the 2 major journals in Korea and 2 major journals in Europe began their publication at the same time. Well, there were 4 other journals, but I will just skip them. 2 of them have since closed, and the other two are not the major journals. What I'm saying is there are a few other journals specializing in game studies, but probably the first one will be the only major journal I can say. Okay, so assuming the game research began in 2001, I reviewed the kind of peculiarities of research papers published since 2001 in Korea. Well, let's see some numbers here. The numbers in the screen kind of summarize the titles and disciplines of the articles published in academic journals in Korea. Maybe about half of them are dealing with some engineering, field of game, and well, for social science, it was less than 1,000. Of course, that numbers are not very accurate figures because I kind of used the search engine. I used the search engine and found calculate by myself. So there must be some errors, but you get the point. It's a kind of sketch of the trend. So as you can see, there is a sharp increase in game-related research after 2001. Well, that is the number of volumes, but the first volume was published in 2001. So you can, take the 9 as a 2009, the year of 2009. So you can see the spike of the publication. But after 2015, the graph is, kind of, we can see some decrease in numbers. But that is the total kind of trend of the publication. But when I shrink the range of the analysis to social science and humanities in game studies, the graph has been changed a little. So we can see the number of papers in social science and humanities in Korea. Well, about 2005, the number of research papers kind of spiked, and the modest but steady increase thereafter. And the graph suggests the interest in gaming as a social phenomenon continued to grow. Well, here are a few results of the analysis. Well, let me just stop here for a moment and go back to the my plan of the presentation. First of all, I like to show some sketch of the game studies in Korea in general. So at this moment, I'm talking about all the research papers in all the academic journals, okay? So I will summarize some findings here. I will share the finding with you, and then I will talk about some specific journals, okay? So please understand, this is what I'm talking about by saying all the journals in the last 20 years. Of course, again, the number is not very accurate, but you don't have any problem to understand general picture and general history. So if I summarized the findings from the analysis of all the research articles, first, there has been a tremendous quantitative development. Probably, I don't need to talk about more further explanation. Second, the range of topics covered in these academic journals has diversified considerably. Well, this is very understandable. Third, the number of papers in the field of business and administration and economics has grown particularly rapidly. Well, we can imagine why it happens. It shows the volume of researches in the field that are very sensitive to the need of industry has increased very fastly and significantly. So that part of research include industry analysis and some reviewing export strategies and billing method, and advertising or pricing and things like that. Very practical purpose, made people to research game research on business and economics. Fourth, no, it was not fourth, but well, I can tell from the analysis of this trend, this history, most interesting games were, viewed as a product or an object to be designed, sold, and used, rather than in humans who play games and have fun with it. Okay. Let's go to the second part of the analysis. Yeah, as I told you, I already mentioned the Journal of the Korean Game Society is the only and is the most prominent journal specialized in game studies in Korea. So I kind of specialize my analysis for that, single journal, and what's the topic of the research articles in the journals, and if there are some changes historically and things like that. So I'm giving some general information about the information, and let me just go directly to the graph here. Okay. Here is a graphical representation of the number of articles by year. The orange colored bars represent the total number of papers, and the blue bar is the number of papers in social science and humanities. Social science and humanities field mainly include education, psychology, marketing, communication, and narrative studies. And as you can see the graph here, the share of social science and humanities has steadily increased, okay, with some variation, obviously. In the last 5 years, about 40% of the articles published in the journal are from social science or humanities perspective. And I kind of arbitrarily divide the 21 years into 4 distinct periods. And let me summarize the history by saying what's the characteristics of the 4 different periods. The first period is from 2001 to 2006. It's volume number 1 through 6, which could be called the baby years. During this period, there were very few studies in the social science and humanities. You can see only 18% of the research papers were about, social and cultural factors of the game. The second period is from 2007 to 2011. It's called the developmental period of game studies. And out of the total 318 articles published during this period, 34%, it's 110 in total, 34.6% were from social science and humanities. And I can tell psychology and education are, most prominent field which deal with the game from their perspectives. Here is an interesting fact. This was the time, I'm talking about 2007 to 2011. This was a time when gambling in adult game was very, important issue in Korean society. All the news reports were talking about the, side effect of game, and especially, when they talking about some game named, what was it, C Story or something like that. It was a gambling rather than game, but it was a very serious social, problem at that time. And similarly, there was some, mention about the gaming addiction for various violent crimes. But as you can see, neither addiction nor gambling were discussed in academic field. It was very interesting thing. Well, only 4 papers out of 318 those only 4 papers analyzed sociological and structural issues, such as, gaming and crime and problem of gaming addiction. So I can tell, no matter how fast the gaming study had developed until then, they don't really deal with the social issues from their point of view. The third period can be called the peak period of game research. A lot of research on game was published, and of the total 447 papers, more than 40% were from social science and humanities. And as I mentioned before, that 40% has continuously, the same, very similar percentage of social science and humanities out of all the game studies. The research topics were incredibly diverse during that third period. Education, psychology, and business administration still dominate, but there is also an increase in other part. Well, here are some papers I found interesting. They are talking about some simulacra and sociological analysis of game addiction and archaeology and some gender issue, things like that. So the topic of the game studies, had now, began to be some, have some diversity and some cultural implications and things like that. The fourth and the final period, it is 2018 to 2022, can be called the stabilization period of game research. But there was no significant changes in terms of qualitative and quantitative, issues. But those 3 fields, business administration, and psychology and education, remained the central field of social science gaming research. The diversity of research field also continued to grow, and there were some interesting topics during this period. But again, we find again the academia is somewhat disconnected from social concerns. During this period, there are a lot of other social issues regarding game, but again, the academia has some distance from those issues. The mid 2010s was a time when the gaming industry and youth education was disrupted by the implementation of so-called shutdown law, right? Shutdown law is something enforced a ban on minor playing online games after midnight. And there was famous WHO's decision to include gaming disorder in ICD-11, and it was a big issue among gaming scene in Korea. And of course, there was a sudden outbreak of COVID-19 from 2020. That makes our normal life very different from the other days. But interestingly, there was little research papers specializing ICD-11 or shutdown law or the impact of the COVID-19 and things like that. Well, it is, to tell you the truth, it is kind of disappointing. Many people keep working on the effect of gameplay, but they always see the psychological effect of game to the infant, or how more violent they become after playing game, things like that. But they don't really give attention to social issues like violence or some law and WHO and ICD-11 and things like that. It was very interesting and disappointing. So I summarized some, 20 years in the Journal of the Korean Game Society, and a few findings can be summarized as follow. Yeah, first, the number of social science and humanities studies on game increased dramatically. It is too obvious. I don't need any more explanation. And topics covered in these papers have also become very diverse. But the dominance of research in three fields, business administration, education, and psychology, has not changed much. They was dominant and they still are dominating in gaming studies. And third, there are not many studies addressing social structure, technology, global relation, and history. So macro level research was hard to find. And this is the most interesting thing from my point of view. Anthropological topics, specifically those related to culture or people's everyday lives, have been underrepresented until very recently. So you remember the title of my presentation today. There was no discussion on cultural factors. Of course there were, but not many, or much less than someone expect. I will go back to this topic later. And finally, it's hard to find some interdisciplinary research. In one issue of the journal, you can find some papers about psychology or some engineering or some design and some communication. There are some diversity in one issue, but it's rare for the competing perspective to lead in one single research. So we can tell the journal is very interdisciplinary, but the research inside of the journal were not very interdisciplinary. Okay, so, well, after reviewing the history of those research papers for the 22 years, I decided to look at some more specific field, which is media and communication field. The reason is, media and communication field is very, close to cultural studies, and they, from my point of view, I guess they allows many research on game and culture to be published. So that was my general feeling before, going deep into the history of the communication field. Let me tell you the result of the study, review of the 20 years of the journals. Well, I searched the game-related articles published in the major communication journals from 2001 to 2022, and I found 10 different journals with at least one game-related articles over the 20 years period. They have total, in total 90 articles. So that's not too many. It's much less than I expected. And there are some journals, and Korean Journal of Journalism and Communication Studies is the most, the prominent journal in the field, and they published 26 articles on game. And another journal named Journal of Cyber Communication Academic Society had 16 papers. The overall number is too small, so it's hard to read too much into the result. Well, I divided those papers into some, period, but I don't think it means a lot. So let me pass it to the next part. So when I see the 90 papers published in the media and communication field, cultural studies and anthropological based studies were often found, obviously, but it was much less so than expected. there were only 13 out of 90 papers could be categorized as philosophical or cultural or even qualitative research on game studies, game culture. Yeah, here we go. There are only 13 papers in 20 years. It's too little, you know. At first I expect maybe there are dozens of papers, you know, dealing with some cultural issues in game, in communication field, but 13 is the maximum I could find. And these studies have, you know, the 13 papers were good. All of them were very interesting. And these studies have greatly extended the scope of the Korean gaming research. But unfortunately, it was too, you know, few. I wrote down some interesting papers from 2001 to 2006. Yeah, I can tell it is very, very, very interesting, but only the problem is there are not many people who are eager to, you know, research the cultural aspect of the game. And it is especially shocking that there are so few game studies on identity politics. Let me see the kind of summary of the findings. You know, at first I was thinking, you know, there would be some papers on gender, class, you know, race or generation, things like that, because those, you know, factors are very important to understand the gaming scene in Korea. But I could find only a few, you know, less than 5 papers about identity politics. It was very interesting and shocking. And, you know, while there were occasional, you know, studies, you know, on gender conflict, you know, that's, yeah, I couldn't find really any serious studies on class and race and age, things like that. So it was for this reason that I decided to do some ethnographical sketch by myself. I have conducted some qualitative studies from anthropological or ethnographical point of view. So in the last 5 years, I conducted my own research project to cover these, you know, shortcomings of Korean gaming studies. So 2019, you can see all of the researches are about people, mostly. So first one was cultural mediator in game scene. By mediator, I mean those people around the gaming scene, not the real, you know, producer or developer or, you know, pro esports player or things like that. But by cultural mediators, it's obviously Broadwell's term. I mean some people who are part of cultural policy making in Korea, or some, you know, owner of PC방 and things like that. So I studied some cultural mediator in game scene a few years back. And I was asked to sketch. It was not serious research, but I sketched some post-COVID-19 game culture in Korea. And some people, you know, I studied gray gamer, that is older gamer, senior who are older than 60s but still playing game, and the middle-aged gamer, and whales, you know. You are using the term whale, right? In Korea, we call the people who spend a lot of money on game whale, and it's a beginning stage of the research, but that is my ongoing project. And of course, I was also working on the game culture and woman, and which will be the topic of presentation tomorrow. So anyway, that's probably the reason I started to concentrate on some gaming culture or game player and some generation issue or gender issue and things like that. How many minutes do I have? 5 minutes? Okay. So actually, I'd like to introduce the main findings of 3 research projects, but I don't think I can do that, in 5 minutes. Well, first of all, I was trying to sketch the change in gaming culture during the pandemic. That was the title of the post-COVID-19 game culture. And let me just, list some major findings because of the lack of time. So first of all, games will become normal part of everyday life. That's for sure. And second, the perception of gaming will change. What it means is there are 2 sides of coin. It's not an addictive substance. I mean, people don't consider game as an addictive substance anymore. But at the same time, it's not likely to become an effective educational tool or a very serious hobby or something like that. It is something like air. It is just, everywhere, and it's not very good or it's not very bad and things like that. So the perception of gaming will change after the COVID-19 period. The third one is something very interesting. The marginalization of so-called hardcore gamers. That's what I'm thinking to be happening. So let me just pass to the next one. Finally, the cultural significance of PC방 will decline. I guess you know what PC방 means in gaming culture, especially in Korea, but its significance has decreased a lot. What I mean by cultural significance of PC방 is beyond gaming. Just 10 years ago, PC방 is the kind of center of adolescent culture. They just get together and play game, but at the same time, they just meet a new friend and doing something together and fight each other and things like that. So it was a physical center of youngsters' everyday life. But I don't think it will be the same after the COVID-19. So that's 4 kind of statement the main findings of the post-COVID-19 game culture. The second project I'd like to introduce was the game culture around older people, or gray gamers, we put the name. Again, to summarize the result, just to list a few sentences, describing who the gray gamers are. First of all, they deny the value of gaming. I don't mean they, really deny the value of game. What I mean is they don't like the term gamer. They reject the idea of the identity of gamer. Even when they play game and they enjoy the game, they don't like to be called gamer. And they always think game or gamer or game thing is the children's culture or youngsters' culture. And this is the another interesting point is they don't like to spend money on game, but they do actually. They spend some money if and when it gives them some pleasure. But at the same time, they don't like to declare I'm spending some money for gaming. So the last one is the kind of correspond to the second statement. This is about the first one. People don't like to spend money, but are willing to pay for pleasure. The last sentence links to the second one. They justify themselves as consumers. They don't like to be called gamer, but they are customers, consumers, and they think they are very smart consumers. They believe very smart, and people who they believe games are useful in limited way. My point is limited way. They agree games can be useful, but only for this the functional aspect of game, dementia prevention or memory retention, things like that. So it's something like this. If you ask older people, do you play game? Then they usually say, no, I don't play game. I'm not a gamer. But actually, when I observe they play game, then what are you doing? It's not gaming. Oh no, that is for preventing some memory retention or something. You know what I mean? So it's they play some therapeutic and casual games. Finally, they see gaming as similar to media consumption. What and how they are talking about their game playing these days are very close to what they were doing with television in 1970s or 80s. What I mean is when they were very young. So they keep comparing gaming to other media. So they regard gaming as something like very ambient media. That's one of the findings I made after observing older gamers. And third part is middle-aged gamer. Let me quickly just show the text here. Well, as a matter of fact, the final report on middle-aged gamer was not even printed yet. When I go back to my home country next week, there will be some presentation day for talking about this middle-aged gamer. It was next week. I will make the final presentation about the result of this analysis. So this is these are just a simple and very quick presentation of two major findings. So one is they grew up with digital games. There are a lot of interesting points, but as you can see the some sentences here, you can get the idea. They are digital people, but also analog people, and they play game, but they don't like to learn a new game. So the most interesting thing about their playing was they have played StarCraft, and they are proud of playing StarCraft very well, but they don't like LOL, League of Legends. And so the generational gap between parent and children is not something like father don't play game, son play game. It's more like father play game A and sons are playing game B. Only the difference in games. And even if they really, play well StarCraft and they like to play games, they don't really want to learn a new game. When they see the League of Legends for the first time, their first reaction is too complicated. I'm too old to learn something new. But if you have a chance to play StarCraft again, they love to play. It is something like this. Yeah. Actually, I already said in the part here. Yeah. So the last sentence, the stereotype about this group is relationship between a parent who doesn't know much about game and child who loves it too much. But that is the wrong and outdated stereotype of middle-aged people. What I mean by middle-aged people is mid-40 to mid-50s. So usually they have some, low-teen children, or they usually have some conflict in family with the children regarding games. Okay, so it's about time to make the conclusion. Yeah, this just a few of the findings, from recent studies I and my colleagues, conducted in the research, or I in the research I'm doing, and these studies, in fact, tied to two recently launched organizations. This is what I'm gonna say. 2 years ago, I and some of my colleagues started an institutions named Game and Science Institute, and that aims to foster international collaboration in game research and support young game researchers. And the Korean chapter of DIGRA was also created. I hope that these two organizations will be kind of forced to solve the problem of Korean game studies I mentioned in today's presentation. Well, I mentioned 2001 was the first year of game studies in both Europe and Korea. And now we are over 20 years old, I guess. And I guess game scholars or game researchers should be more mature, and more responsible, like an adult, in, game studies. So in this sense, I hope the Korean game research will, be more helpful in the game researches or understanding game culture in the world for the foreseeable futures. Okay, that's about it for today. Thank you. I will conclude my presentation here.
Thank you. We have the mic here and we have time for questions, so I will be throwing this to the first hand. Thank you. Thank you for really interesting update. It's wonderful. I visited, I think, South Korea in 2004. We were invited, Espen Aaset and myself and some others at the time. And I remember that I was puzzled about the cultural gap, which was basically linguistic gap. Korea Games Conference that was taking place there. Almost everything was only in Korean. We were translated into Korean, but nothing was translated into English. So that was the sad situation. But how do you see the accessibility of Korean game research, which is so wonderfully interesting, like you have outlined today, for international audiences? Are there like English abstracts available, or do we just use the Google Translate?
Well, very good point. Actually, in Game and Science Institute, we are proceeding a few projects, and one of them is translating and introducing some interesting Korean research into English, so that other parts of the world can read and understand the result of the research. So we have a small homepage, and we are at the beginning stage, but we have already translated some abstract of Korean game studies into English already. And if everything goes really well, then I hope and I expect most of the major research result will be translated in 5 or 10 years. That's my own plan.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Next one.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting to probe every detail of this context. What I was thinking about, did you look into a situation with thesis of undergraduate students? Because I saw in different cultural contexts and in different topics that are not usually covered in peer-reviewed journals, that there might be lots of master's theses, for example, dedicated to those topics. what is the situation in Korean game studies with that?
You mean, well, I'm not sure if I understand correctly, but so your question was about the student from another culture?
I mean, for example, you mentioned that there are not many studies of different social topics in Korean game studies. Do Korean students do those topics?
Ah, I see. Yes, wow, that's a good point, really good point, because I should say there are still some generational gap in Korean game studies, you know. What I'm saying is younger generation of scholars, you know, they who are master degree student or even undergraduate student, they enjoy playing game and they know what the game, you know, in meaning in everyday life, and their perspective is different from the older generation of scholars. So they, well, I didn't really check the master's thesis or doctoral dissertation yet, but the topics of game studies from their point of view will be very different from what I, you know, presented today, I guess. And I hope, you know, they will grow up and make much more interesting research project, maybe from 5 or 10 years from now on.
For European PhD students and master student studies we have, is there any like visiting scholarship opportunities from game scholars here in Europe to be able to go to South Korea to do field studies and comparative studies?
Let me get straightforward. There are little chance, you know. There have been some discussion about the possibility to invite some scholars from outside of our country, but there was no established, you know, rules or, you know, funding program like that. But it's my personal opinion. But I'm always open to invite some foreign scholars, even, you know, when he or she is a doctoral student or even master student, to come to Korea and, you know, do their research. I like to really support their research, but it's very hard to make any, you know, establish the program to financially support those foreign, you know, scholars. Thank you.
Hi. There are a few different projects that we talked about at the end were super interesting, and I was wondering if you could say a few more words about gray gamers. I was wondering if you look into sort of how long these people have played this project. Is it something that sort of they've picked up later in life, or is it something that they've continued with for a long while already?
Well, I kind of summarized the result, you know, into just a few sentences. So there were a lot of missing, you know, part. In the research project, I divided the people into 3 different categories. One is used to be an intense gamer, but don't play game anymore. And second part was had been a gamer for last 50 or 60 years. And the last part, which will be most interesting, those who learn how to play game after, you know, 50 or 60 years old. So the result of, you know, each types are different, obviously, but the most of the part I mentioned today was about the third part of the people. But for the first two groups, they have a lot of interesting results too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering if you have any numbers or if you are thinking on approaching also the foreign publications about Korean game culture.
You mean Korean scholars publication in English or foreigners publication in Korean?
Well, I would think of both because probably even if they are Korean scholars that are writing for international audiences, maybe there's a difference from the approach.
I see. I'm sorry, but I don't have any exact number or something. But when I check for my own, purpose, I have found, to tell you the truth, a lot of, Korean scholars, writing on Korean game industry or, psychology or culture. But when I check, the same thing happens, There were little research project which is dealing with Korean gaming culture or Korean gaming people. Most of the papers were about the psychological effect of game to Korean, boys and girls and things like that. So, well, I'm not sure. Well, there may be some, but I don't think there are too many research papers on Korean gaming culture. I can remember at least 10 or 20, but I don't think there are, much more than 20.
Time for one more question. I will ask one question which has always been interesting to me. As you and everyone see in this room, when we speak of games research in Finland, we often include a lot of different kinds of games, including card games and board games and LARP and all live-action role-playing. But in Korea, the word game became this sort of a computer game affiliation very strongly. So can you tell a little bit about this? Do you have any idea if there is research on like board game or card game that might not be part of the games research, because it's a different concept?
Well, I can tell you cannot really find any serious academic research on, let's say, board game or card game in Korea. Well, I usually compare the game studies to television studies of 1970s and 80s, because when I was very young and student, it is kind of shame that scholars were not supposed to study television because it is too cheap and it's not serious. So they are not supposed to work on something like that. I guess that tradition has changed, but it is found these days in gaming studies, If I say I'm studying game, then people always, first impression is game studies? Why don't you just, keep studying television or Korean wave? Why do you study game? Something like that. Why, why the reason why I'm saying this is, if I decide to study card game or board game, the reaction should be more intense. You know what I mean? Okay, digital game, video game, okay, it is very important these days, and our industry is very big, and Korea is very good at esports and things like that. Okay, you can study, but if I decide to play, work on card game, then I guess it's not popularly accepted in academic community. Well, it may be just one of many other reasons, but That should be very important reasons. There are few studies in other games. But actually, I'm thinking of study board game from now on. I talked with someone, in another country, and he was interested in the board game culture in Korea. So I decided to cooperate with him and get some data. I'm working on getting data about the board game. So in 1 or 2 years, there may be some papers on it.
One for Korean board. Yes, we are out of time. Thank you everyone for joining. Also a reminder of tomorrow's lecture on women gaming in Korea. There will be a link if you're not able to physically be present in Jyväskylä. Actually, the link, I think Raine Koskima will send the link today at some point, but welcome to that lecture as well. And big thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.